What is a secondary dominant chord? How do you use them and how do we improvise over them? In this lesson, I hope to demystify that and show you how you can use secondary dominant chords. These type of chords are used from everyone from Duke Ellington all the way up to Oasis, so you're going to get the full course in today's lesson. Let's do this. The first thing you need to know, if you don't already, is the harmonized major scale. I'm just going to play that in the key of C so that we can refresh that and then move on from there. The two most common degrees of this scale in which chord progressions usually modulate to are either the 3 or the 6. The 3 or the 6. Let's take, for example, the third degree of the C major scale. If we think about that as being diatonically related to a C, then we have the chord E minor 7. What happens if we change that chord quality to a dominant 7? So from E minor 7, we're going to go to E7. This is where I'm sure some of you are getting a little bit confused. You see that E7 and you think it's got nothing to do with C, but where do dominant 7s typically want to go? Well, more often than not, they actually want to resolve to the 1 chord. So in this case, the E7 either wants to resolve to the major or the minor, A major or A minor. So if you think about A minor and you think about C major, then those keys are related. The 1 and 6 sound very similar, and that's why they're often interchangeable. So sometimes when you see an E7, although it might seem like you've really gone far from the key of C, and sometimes that might happen, but more often than not, that E7 is coming back to A minor only a bar later, so it doesn't really make sense to go too far outside of the key of C. So we'll get more into that in just a second. The chord progression which I'm going to use to explain this is All of Me. All of Me starts on the 1 chord and we have 2 bars of C. After that we go to E7 in bar 3. That's our first secondary dominant chord there, an E7. So that's chord 3, E7. After that we go to an A7, which is yet again another secondary dominant, and here is what happens. We have the secondary dominant, and this time this secondary dominant does resolve to a chord which is diatonically in the key of C. This A7 goes where you think it's going to go. It resolves to a D minor 7 chord. So that would be the case which I just mentioned earlier. So let's have a look at Exhibit 1, if you will. Exhibit 1 is the E7 which we've just looked at right there. Now with that E7, that kind of is going a little bit further from the key than the A7 because that's moving in a cyclic way really. So for that E7, then you could really think about like a mixed Lydian mode or something like that, and that would be fine to do. However, this A7, if you try and attribute a mode to that, for example a Mixolydian mode, that's not going to work so well, because if you look at where that chord is going next, it's going to D minor 7, and the Mixolydian mode has a lot of natural extensions in the scale, like for example it has a natural 13, a natural 9. All these are typically undesirable in a minor 2-5-1 situation. So really the scale which I'd recommend here when you resolve into D minor is the D harmonic minor scale, because all those tensions want to resolve to the 1 chord. So that's where chord scale relationship kind of can slip you up a little bit if you're not too careful. Following that, we have yet again another secondary dominant. This time we've got an E7, and the E7 is going to A minor. So that's another perfect example of the type of secondary dominant that does resolve. So once again, I would be thinking more A harmonic minor here. So I think it's best to always look at where harmony is going, where chords are going, because if you don't look at that and you just try and see things on a chord scale basis, then you could end up with this type of thing. And as you can see here, this scale map, which I've just got on the screen now, doesn't really help us that much. Thinking about mixolydian for these dominant chords that resolve in is not really going to be that effective. Thinking of Dorian scales, although you could use some language from that for those chords, you're not seeing the bigger picture. You're not seeing that that dominant 7 chord is resolving to that minor 7 chord, and therefore it's going to be hard to kind of connect these chords together to make music with them. Hopefully now you're starting to see that most jazz standards really don't travel that far from the key which they started in. In fact, it really doesn't make sense to introduce other key centers unless it's absolutely necessary. So most jazz standards will use secondary dominants. In fact, you'll be hard pressed to find a jazz standard which doesn't use a secondary dominant in some way. So what I wanted to do was include a different song to compare All of Me to, which isn't a jazz standard. So I thought I'd go and pick on the band Oasis, because they're sometimes not known to not like jazz, and they sometimes have acknowledged that they don't like jazz in interviews and things like that.
They're all playing a different song all at the same time in different tempos, in different keys, and they call it jazz.
To finish off, I'm going to leave you with a few licks over All of Me so that you can really hear what I'm talking about in a musical setting. I purposely left quite a lot of space in this solo so that you can hear the purpose behind the licks, right? I'm treating all the 5 chords as one chord, and I'm playing into the chords rather than treating them as separate entities. So it's not really a full solo in itself, but you can hopefully use these concepts and this approach to improvising over All of Me, and of course any jazz standard with secondary dominance, to gain more coherency and more fluency in your improvisation. What's your favourite secondary dominant example? Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. That way we can all build a list to ensure that we cover all secondary dominant chords that you might encounter in jazz repertoire. Thanks for watching this video. Furthermore, if you've got any comments that you'd like to leave asking any questions about secondary dominance, then feel free to do that in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video and you found it useful, then please give this video a like to help support the channel.